let's read the narrative there. I'm just going to read the Cain and Abel narrative before we get to the genealogy. And Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man." That's where the significance comes from in the name. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Wind, breath, meaningless. It's kind of like, Cain! And then came Abel. Not so much. Now Abel kept flocks. Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. What is the land of Nod? What does your footnote say? Anybody have a footnote on that? Nod? Wanderer. Yeah. They call it a land, but he's wandering. Wandering. The importance of names. Page 75. Adam, man, mankind, dust. Okay. Eve, living, or Gail even said snake-like, live wire. Or was it you, Dee, that said snake, right? Snake. I like the word live wire. Eve means live wire. Okay, in the metaphor, right? You've heard of people described as a live wire. Okay. Cain brought forth, produced, created, smithed. Okay, you see the connection there? Brought forth, created, worked, manipulated, smithed it. Yeah, as a smithy, which comes important later. We're going to find out. Abel means breath, vapor, nothing much, meaningless. All right, so in this, whoever the author was, remember this is an oral tradition. Oral meaning it was meant to be done just as I did, read aloud to you. And you would recognize things like Adam lay with his wife, she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord I have caned a man. I have brought forth, I have created, I have smithed a man." So you as the audience would hear these nuances. That's why she named him Cain, because she caned him. That's why she named him brought forth, or smithy, or smith, because she smithed him. So as the audience, you would hear these nuances as they go through. So I'm going to try to draw your attention to them as we go through this. Now you might have to share one. I think we're down.
Did you write on yours?
All right. So we're on page 75 there, Levita.
Alrighty.
So the literary nuances, or playing with words. Adam lay with his wife. Some of the older translations, Adam knew his wife. Remember the old King James? Knew his wife. Or Adam now had the knowledge of his wife, took control of her. Now, this knowledge is a very dominating kind of word. It's almost, not quite, but almost an abusive kind of thing. Okay, we think of this as kind of a passive, natural husband and wife kind of thing. But because of the fall, or now since the fall, when they have that knowledge of good and evil, that word has an extra connotation behind it of something, taking control over, something very forceful. Okay, we're going to see that a few times in this. So it's not just them doing the natural act. It's Adam almost forcibly taking Eve. Okay. With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man, or I have caned a man, as Yahweh. And so you'll notice the phrase says, she said, with the help of the Lord. Now some of the older translations, or even Fox's translation, will say instead of with the help of the Lord, she will say, I have made a man just like the Lord. Okay, instead of with the help of the Lord. It kind of depends on how those words in the Hebrew are translated. We like to kind of give Eve the benefit of the doubt. Now you'll notice at the end, Eve comes around, but at this very beginning, Eve is kind of a live wire. She's kind of a live wire. She's not out on her own. So she's saying, I've done something just like the Lord did. I have smithed a man. I have brought forth a man. I have caned a Cain. Okay? I have created just like God, as she is saying. And then later, why are you angry? Why are you downcast? Okay? After the sacrifices are not accepted, the emphasis is not on the sacrifices. And I find myself questioning, why was Cain's accepted or not accepted and Abel's accepted? I spend all my time wondering that, but the narrative just kind of brushes on that. It doesn't really answer that question. I've heard sermons on this, and maybe even given some sermons on this, that say, well, Cain just gave some of his fruit, whereas Abel gave the fat portions. Or Cain had the bad attitude and Abel had the right attitude. You know, the narrative really doesn't address that. The narrative is trying to focus on Cain's response. What do you do when trouble comes, is the focus of the narrative. What do you do when something happens to upset you? What do you do? That's the focus of the narrative. It's not on why Cain's was and was not and Abel's was accepted. That's not it. The question is, what do you do when you are not accepted, when you're having troubles? How do you respond to it? You notice that's where most of the narrative spends its time. Not on why one was or the other one wasn't. The focus of it is, why are you angry, downcast? If you do what is right, are you not accepted? Or, alternate translation, why do you feel wrong looking down? If you feel right, lift it up. Okay, so it has the feeling in there, and the up versus down. Why do you feel wronged? Because he wasn't necessarily wrong. Okay, why do you feel wronged, as opposed to if you would feel right? When you feel wronged, you're looking down, because it says his eyes were downcast. But if you feel right, why don't you lift up? Why aren't you just lifting up? Praising. Why do you feel wrong? So that play of up versus down and feeling wrong versus feeling right is in the Hebrew there. Cain attacked and killed. The whole question, where is your brother? I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Okay, that whole part of the narrative. Or Cain knew Abel. It's that same word. Okay. Now, I've even heard some preachers that would say that it was a homosexual kind of thing. No, that's not what it is. It's a domineering kind of thing. Cain controlled. He domineered Abel. Okay. Then, am I my brother's keeper, caretaker, or the one put in charge of him? So he was, dominating him, took charge of him, but then he says later to God, am I the one that's supposed to take charge of him? So he knows, he uses that play, that he did take charge, but then his question, am I supposed to keep charge? Same word for Adam keeping the garden, or the Sphinx keeping the way to the tree of life, that same word. Okay, protecting. Am I the one that's not supposed to dominate and push down and put in danger? And then later, the earth shall no longer yield to you. Same word. You will not be able to dominate the earth anymore. Okay? To know, control, to dominate the ground to produce crops. So, first you have the use of the word of Adam laying with his wife, knowing, controlling, dominating his wife. And then you have Cain controlling, dominating Abel, and then saying, am I the one that's supposed to control, dominate Abel? And then God saying later, he says, you will not even be able to control, dominate the ground like you used to. It will not produce for you anymore. You won't be able to put that together anymore. Am I hearing the wind blow up here? Is that sir? Yeah. All right, so you see where the narrative's going? It's using that same word in 4 different instances. You will be a restless wanderer. We talked about that. That's literally what nod means, wanderer. One who continues to wander. The mark on Cain. Now that's an interesting thing. Put a mark on him. A sign, a warning, an omen, a miracle. That same word is used for miracle. Unknown specifically what it is, but it could be a tongue-in-cheek reference to Moses and Pharaoh. You go. I can see question marks on your forehead. Okay, some of the references, and in fact Fox uses this. I'm not sure if Alter does or not, but Fox uses this. Remember that first Moses was a restless wanderer, right? For 40 years he was wandering, and then the Israelites later wandered. And so you have to have this wandering concept of Cain. And then God sent him back with what? To prove to the Pharaoh that God was God. With signs, with miracles, with marks to show that he is God. Okay, so there's an interesting play there, and I'm not sure that it might have been almost there. I picture, okay, Moses telling the story or writing the story or reciting the story for the first time to the Israelites after he's put it together and composed it or whatever. And so they're wandering in the 40 years in the wilderness, right? And they're already wandering. And it's almost like he says tongue-in-cheek that Cain had this sign, this miracle put on him as he was wandering as well. And it's almost like this tongue-in-cheek kind of aside reference that he puts in there. So nobody knows for sure what that mark, that sign, that miracle, that omen was or could be. And I always thought it was Gorbachev's little spot on. Right? So what did the story mean to them back then? That's how we need to discover the narrative. What did it mean to them back then? And then how can we translate that to us? What did the narrative mean to them at that time? After you've caught the nuances of it all now. So incorporate the names, the definition for the names, and then the focus of the narrative that we talked about. It's not on one sacrifice accepted or the other. It's about what?
God's control.
God's control, yes. Yeah. And not man's. Right? As much as man tries to control, God really is in control. That's a good point, focus of this narrative. What else?
Is this still an etiological tale?
It could be.
Is it only for...
I'm just saying right now that part of Genesis 3 was, but there are some etiological tales, etiological inferences you can get out of this, but it'll especially be as we talk about the genealogy. Anybody else want to venture a guess at the focus of the narrative?
To them, man dominant over woman.
Okay. You can get that but now it's more of, remember we said it's a unique thing before the fall. After the fall, it's a knowledge thing where there's this battle now going on. This battle of control, this battle of wills, this battle of whatever, okay, that goes on between men and women because of the fall. And so, yeah, this is the first story of that battle going on. But also how that battle plays out in their kids, and starting to see it in future generations as it goes on. Right? This is the first death. Isn't that interesting? The first death. I mean, we don't even know of animals dying before this.
Yeah.
Well, we do.
Skins.
We do. God made skins of animals for them. Okay. But it's the first death.
First man death.
Okay. So what does it mean to us today? Well, one part of the narrative, I guess I'm answering my own question then if I say this, that I tried to emphasize is it's not why am I good or why is that person's sacrifice good and mine bad. That's not the part of it. In other words, you're not supposed to try to figure out why one's good, why one's not, because it's always going to happen. What you got to deal with is your reaction to it. Sin is crouching at your door, right? Ready to pounce on you. How are you going to handle it when things go bad? How do you handle it when things go bad? And that, I believe, is one of the points, or one of the focuses of this narrative. Okay. And which, again, also can be translated to us. We don't want to deal with it like Cain did, right? And dominate, use that dominating, that knowledge we now have. Okay, that knowledge, controllingness of it. All right? A little more deeper than what you originally thought of Cain and Abel. All right, let's look at the genealogy of Cain, page 76. The genealogy of Cain. We'll pick up the narrative there. Cain lay with his wife. Now you know what that means, right? Now, we have all this surface stuff. I get this all the time. Where did Cain find his wife? Right? Where did Cain find his wife? It was just Cain and now Abel's dead and Seth isn't even born yet. Where did Cain get a wife? Well, again, a number of things. First, this is a narrative. It's narrative logic. It doesn't have to make logical sense. This could have been 1,000 years later. This could have been, well, maybe not 1,000 years because I don't believe they lived that long. But it could have been years and years and years later. It could have been whatever. That's not the point. The narrative is what's important, not the fact that certain Socratic logic doesn't happen here, right? Remember, this is narrative logic, not Socratic, Greek, Western logic like we're used to, okay? Cain lay with his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, which again, you should know now, is a sin. Why is it a sin for Cain to build a city? If you were back, you would know. Because he was supposed to be a nod. He's supposed to be a restless wanderer. People weren't supposed to find him. Okay, but here he builds a city. And he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, to Irad. And Irad was the father of Mahujael. And Mahujael was the father of Methushael. And Methushael was the father of Lamech. Lamech married 2 women, one named Ada and the other Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who lived in tents and raised livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who played the harp and flute. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all what does Cain mean again? Smithy? Who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. All right, so we got Adam and Eve's line. You see it there in the box. Cain, Abel, and eventually Seth, even though Seth isn't quite born yet. Right? And then Cain gave birth to Enoch, gave birth to Irad, gave birth to Mahujael, gave birth to Methujael, gave birth to Lamech, who had 2 wives, Ada and Zillah. Ada had Jubal and Jabal, and Zillah had Tubal Cain and Naamah. Names are important. Page 77. Names are important. Enoch means initiated or started or disciplined. Irad means wild donkey, or in the old parlance, a wild ass, right? A runner, crazy one. Mehujael means smitten by God. You see the word El in that. When names end with El or Yah in there somewhere, you know God is involved in that name somewhere. Smitten by God or cursed by God. Methushael means ignored by God, cast aside by God. You see what the names are telling you now? You see what the names are telling you? Lamech means wild man, one who strikes, one who smites. One who smites. Ada means, that's one of his wives, means dawn, ornament, pretty thing, trinket. Zillah means dusk, shadow. Now, interesting, because one of the translations thought these names were a merism. Remember what does merism mean? I'm teaching you all these grammatical terms. What is a merism?
Everything in between the 2 ends.
It has the 2 ends, which is meant to include everything in the middle, first and last. Beginning and end, Alpha and Omega, the heavens and the earth. Okay, that's a merism. That you say the extremes in order to include everything. Okay, young and old alike. Okay, that doesn't mean just a young and old, it means everybody in between. Okay, that's a merism. Dawn and dusk is the name of his 2 wives. The insinuation is that he didn't just have 2 wives, he took whatever he wanted, whoever he wanted, whenever he wanted. Because again, that's his name. Lamech is one who takes, one who strikes, one who smites. He does whatever he wants. So it could mean that. Or they could simply be named Ada and Zillah. Okay, Zillah is dusk or shadow. Jabal, name of one of the sons, stream of water, a good place to camp or raise livestock. So what did Jubal do? He was the father of those who lived in tents and raised livestock. Jubal, Jabal and Jubal, stream of music. You notice the similar in the name. So stream of water, stream of music. Jubilee you've heard of, right? Lots of music. Stream of music, and Jubal was the father of all who played the harp and the flute. Tubal Cain. Both Tubal and Cain mean the same thing. Made, brought forth, smithy. And it could be one of those emphasis where a word is repeated. Tubal Cain is like a double Cain, double smithy, double brought forth, made. And then Naamah means beautiful, longed for. That's the daughter. So, what is that saying to us, all those names? Just looking at the names, what is it saying to you? Remember again, you're ancient Hebrews, hearing these names, knowing what the name means. Okay, now, if I would say to you again, well, you probably don't, unless you have a child, my son's name is Jonathan. Okay, now most people would just think, oh, Jonathan, that's a nice name. But if you were Hebrew, you would hear loved of God. You would hear loved of God. Okay, if you heard the word Jamin, my second son, you would think strong arm of God. Ben-Jamin is son of Jamin. Strong arm of God. And then I have Trista, which means melancholy. And boy, all 3 of my kids lived up to their names. Or we named them appropriately. Or it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. But there's something in the name. So you, as good ancient Hebrews, would see Enoch and know that meant started. Something got started, something got going. You would hear Irad and you would start to think, well, what got started was wildness, craziness, a wild donkey. And then Mahujael means that wild donkey was smitten by God, ignored by God is the next one. And then comes out this one who strikes, who smites, who is angry all the time, Lamech. And then you see this poem by Lamech. It talks about his 2 wives, or he has whatever wife he wants. Okay, he controls anyone he wants. And then of his control comes people who raise livestock, people who do music, people who smith things, put things together, and those that are women that are beautiful and longed for, which is going to come up later, if we remember the sons of God come to be with the beautiful women of man, okay? Children of men. Okay? So that's going to come up later in the chapter. So what do you see in the names? You see the progression here? You see the progression of sin. You see the progression of God, like removing himself or pulling himself back from this line, this particular line. He's ignored by God, smitten by God, pulling himself back. Literary nuances again. Cain knew his wife, dominated, controlled, and there was no name to that wife. Interesting what's left out as well as what's in there. There's no name to that wife. So the mystery is, again, where did Cain get his wife? Right? Note, no ages. Did you notice that? There are no ages to these generations. When we get to next week to chapter 5, every generation has an age label on it. It says that so-and-so was 120 years old when he had such and such son, and he lived another 600 years, and he died at 869, whatever, right? That's all the next chapter is.
That's crazy.
We're going to talk about that, what that means, okay? No ages here. There's only one number that shows up, which is the next one. Lamech is the 7th generation. Count them: Adam, Cain, Enoch, Jared, Methujael, number 7, Lamech. Avenged 7 times, 77. 77 times. What's the deal with all these 7s? 7th generation. Now we remember the story, previous story, that God will avenge 7 times on whoever messes with Cain, right? Whoever tries to dominate Cain, God will avenge 7 times. But Lamech says 77 times, and he's the 7th generation. What's it saying? But there's only one number, that there's no ages, like there is in the generations of Seth, and that the only number we find is the number 7.
Well, you could go back to the creation too, when it took 7 days.
Yeah. So what does 7 mean?
It's a very strong, emphasizes that God has on the word. 7.
Okay.
Uses 7s a lot of times in the book.
He uses 7 a lot. It's one of Gospel of John. It's one of the Apostle John's favorite numbers.
It says in my study Bible that Jesus used 77 as a counter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, comes up in Jesus' time. How much should I forgive my brother who has sinned against me? 7 times? Jesus says no, 70 times 7. So what does that mean? So I only have to forgive D 77 times. The 78th time, D, I'm going to start smacking you.
Now you just said 7 times 70.
Yeah, you can actually translate it both ways. So either 490 times or 77 times. One of the two. Is that what it means, Gail? What does it mean?
Well, I think it means, well, isn't 7 perfection or God? So the right, God's number of times. Or
7 is a number of, maybe not necessarily perfection, but completion. 7 is the number of completion. 7 days of creation. That's where it comes from. Okay, so it's all complete here. Now, what's complete with Lamech being the seventh and 77 times? And so Jesus, when he says it, and I think the same with Lamech, when he says it, he says it to don't ever quit forgiving, right? That's the insinuation of 70 times 7. When Lamech says it, I am not going to complete paying back, smiting, killing. Okay? And that fact that he is a 7th generation is, as we're going to find out, because what happens in chapter 6 of Genesis? Oh, you guys know your Bibles?
Flood.
The flood. The flood. And why does the flood have to happen? Because everybody has every inclination of every part of their heart is toward evil all the time. It's some extreme statements, right? Before Noah. But for Noah, we found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Right? So sin is complete. It is completely filled with sin. Okay, that's the nuances of the 7, and it's not meant to be, again, we can kind of think, okay, that Lamech was the grandson of Mahujael, was a grandson of Enoch, who was a grandson of Adam, and people try to put dates on things and try to put things where they are based on genealogies, and that's not the point at all. The genealogy is telling you something totally different than who is the father, because when it says in here the father of, it could also mean the ancestor of. Okay, so there might be 20 generations between these people. We don't know. And very specifically, because there are no numbers on this, we know that this could have lasted 1,000 years, this could have lasted 7 generations times an average of 25, 175 years. Okay? We don't know. And that's the reason why there's no dates on it. Okay? The only number put on it is the number of completeness. Sin became complete in these people. And we're going to see the opposite next week as we talk about the line of Seth. What does that genealogy tell us? Which is interesting, which is the next one, note under literary nuances there on 77. The negative connotations with the names stop after Lamech. There's really nothing wrong with the names Jubal, Jabal, Tubal-Cain, and Naamah. There's really nothing wrong with it, is there? Okay. It's like the sin went right up to Lamech as the epitome of it, the 7th generation, the one that sin is complete in, and then the rest. We're going to explain how things happened, how we got people who live in tents, how we got music, how we got, that's the ideological tale, Gail, part of this. Okay, that's how we got people who live in tents and wandering, and people where music came from, and now, okay? But again, that's not the focus of the narrative. The narrative is sin is becoming complete in Lamech, which after we find the genealogy of Seth, we're going to start the flood story, which, because it's complete, God has to do something. Right? We all know the story ahead. Because it's complete, God had to do something. All right? So again, what did the story mean to them back then? What does it mean to us today? We see that sin can become complete, ignored by God, but there is hope, because there's a whole nother line of Adam that we're going to talk about. These really chapter 4 and 5 are tied together in this narration. So let's talk about Adam's good line, which is right at the end of chapter 4. Adam's good line. Adam lay with his wife again, and she gave birth to us. Now, that one word we miss in English. He lay with his wife again. Now, the first time we heard that, saw that, it wasn't in reference to Abel, right? We don't even know that Adam laid with his wife for Abel. We assume that, but the Bible narration doesn't tell us that, does it? So what we have is that word again, that we translate it as again, but in Hebrew it's with permission. There's a sense of with permission. And Adam lay with his wife with permission. Again. It's like she didn't know what was happening the first time, but this time okay. This time okay. Right? And she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. Now notice the change in Eve from that live wire to God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. What was Cain's name? What did Cain's name mean again? What was Eve saying when she named him Cain? Look what I've done! Look what I've done! I have done something just like God! I've created a human! And now what is she saying in Seth? God has granted me. See a change in Eve here. God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Or that word dominating, knew him, is right there. Seth also had a son and named him Enosh. At that time, men began to call on the name of the Lord. Now, if you have a Thompson's Chain reference, which is a Bible I recommend, whatever version you like, get a Thompson's Chain reference. Because the beauty of a Thompson's Chain reference is, it will, as opposed to a Bible that will just have a listing of wherever any word occurs. If you want to look up the word prayer, it'll tell you every time it says pray, prayer. But Thompson's Chain will say when they pray and they don't use the word pray. Whereas commentaries or those Bible dictionaries will just give you when they use the word. Thompson's Chain will say this is the first occurrence of prayer. Men began to call on the name of the Lord. No, it's more deep than that. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. It's a little deeper than that. Okay, again, the importance of names. Seth, it means granted or allowed. Enosh means mortal or temporal. You're starting to understand they're mortal. They're not going to live forever. Right? Through the whole thing with Lamech's side of the family and now with knowing that Cain killed Abel, they know they're mortal. We're not gods, is what they're saying. We're not gods. The alternate versions of that last line, Fox says, at that time, they first called out the name of Yahweh. Notice Yahweh, which is the name given to Moses. So that's, again, we know this was written after the burning bush. Altar, which is the book that Dee has, it was then that the name of the Lord was first invoked. King James Version, then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. Amplified, at that time, men began to call upon God by the name of the Lord. Hebrew, kara, which is a verb to call out, to cry unto, to read aloud, to be summoned, to be begged for. I like that. Steve's version, my version. God no longer walked and talked with them, so they began to beg for him. God no longer walked and talked with them like he used to. And they know what they were missing, and they started to beg for him. That's the first inference of prayer. Okay? At that time, men began to call out, to beg for the Lord himself. Please be with us. Come down with us. Interesting way to end the chapter. Okay? It said snake-like live wire. Or was it you, Dee, that said snake-like? Snake. I like the word live wire. Eve means live wire. Okay? In the metaphor, right? You've heard of people described as a live wire. Okay? Cain brought forth, produced, created, smithed. Smithed. Okay? You see the connection there? Brought forth, created, worked, manipulated, smithed it as a smithy, which comes important later, we're going to find out. Abel means breath, vapor, nothing much, meaningless. All right, so in this, whoever the author was, remember this is an oral tradition. Oral meaning it was meant to be done just as I did, read aloud to you. And you would recognize things like Adam lay with his wife, she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord I have caned a man. I have brought forth, I have created, I have smithed a man. So you as the audience would hear these nuances. That's why she named him Cain, because she caned him. That's why she named him brought forth, or smithy, or smith. Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. But the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. What is the land of Nod? What does your footnote say? Anybody have a footnote on that? Nod? Wanderer.
Wanderer.
Yeah. They call it a land, but he's wandering. Wandering. No, wandering. The importance of names. Page 75. Adam, man, mankind, dust. Okay. Eve, living, or Gail even. Let's read the narrative there. I'm just going to read the Cain and Abel narrative before we get to the genealogy. And Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man. That's where the significance comes from in the name. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Wind, breath, meaningless. It's kind of like, Cain! And then came Abel. Not so much. Now Abel kept flocks. Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? I don't know, he replied. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, what have you done? Not just them doing the natural act. It's Adam almost forcibly taking Eve. Okay? With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man, or I have caned a man, as Yahweh. And so you'll notice the phrase says, she said, with the help of the Lord. Now some of the older translations, or even Fox's translation, will say instead of with the help of the Lord, she will say, I have made a man just like the Lord. Okay, instead of with the help of the Lord. It kind of depends on how those words in the Hebrew are translated. We like to kind of give Eve the benefit of the doubt. Now you'll notice at the end, Eve comes around, but at this very beginning, Eve is kind of a live wire. She's kind of a live wire. She's not out on her own. So she's saying, I've done something just like the Lord did. I have smithed a man. I have brought forth a man. I have caned a Cain. Okay? I have created just like God, as she is saying. And then later, why are you angry? Why are you downcast? Okay? After the sacrifices are not accepted, the emphasis is not on the sacrifices. And I find myself questioning because she smithed him. So as the audience, you would hear these nuances as they go through. So I'm going to try to draw your attention to them as we go through this. Now you might have to share one. I think we're down.
Did you write on yours?
All right. So we're on page 75 there, Levita.
Alrighty.
So the literary nuances, or playing with words. Adam lay with his wife. Some of the older translations, Adam knew his wife. Remember the old King James? Knew his wife. Or, Adam now had the knowledge of his wife, took control of her. Now, this knowledge is a very dominating kind of word. It's almost, not quite, but almost an abusive kind of thing. Okay, we think of this as kind of a passive, natural husband and wife kind of thing. But because of the fall, or now since the fall, when they have that knowledge of good and evil, that word has an extra connotation behind it of something, taking control over, something very forceful. Okay, we're going to see that a few times in this. So it's not